A little girl stood on a street corner in the snow, holding a German Shepherd police dog on a leash and a handwritten cardboard sign that said, $5. Not 500, not 50, $5. For a canine that had served 3 combat tours, taken a bullet for his handler, and been decorated by the state of Virginia. Marcus Cole stopped walking. He had walked through firefights in Fallujah without stopping. He had held a perimeter for 11 hours in temperatures that cracked equipment. But a little girl in a winter coat, selling her father's police dog for $5, stopped him completely. He had to know why. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment telling me what city you were watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it started, because what Marcus did next is the part nobody saw coming, including Marcus. Marcus Cole had been discharged for 43 days. He knew the exact number because he had been counting them, the way you count something you are not sure whether you want to reach the end of. Each day, a small confirmation that the life he had lived for 6 years was finished, and the life he was supposed to be living now had not yet shown up to replace it. His apartment in Millbrook, Virginia had a couch, a duffel bag he had not fully unpacked, and a kitchen that contained a box of protein bars and a coffee maker he had not learned to use properly. He had a discharge check and a bank account he checked every 3 days. He had no obligations before 900, and no obligations after 1700, and the complete, unstructured freedom of a man with nowhere to be, which was the most disorienting thing he had experienced in 6 years of structured, purposeful, operationally dense military service. He walked because walking gave the day a direction. He was on Clement Street at 8:12 on a Tuesday morning in February when he saw her. She was small, maybe 8 years old, maybe 9, standing at the edge of the sidewalk with both hands gripping a standard police canine lead attached to a German Shepherd that was sitting beside her with the alert, contained composure of a working dog maintaining its training in an environment that was not its operational context. The dog's tan and gold coat was visible, even against the gray of the morning. His dark eyes were moving systematically across the street in the trained environmental scan of an animal that had been built for exactly the kind of attention that a regular pet never develops. The girl was holding the cardboard sign in her right hand and the lead in her left, and she was watching the people walking past her with the specific expression of a child who has decided to do something very hard and is in the process of discovering just how hard it actually is. The sign said, "Good police dog for sale, $5. His name is Shadow." Marcus stopped. He had not planned to stop. His body made the decision before his mind had finished reading the sign, the automatic arrest of forward motion produced by something that did not compute and required resolution before anything else could proceed. He looked at the dog. The dog looked at him with those dark, systematic eyes, and made the assessment of every trained working animal encountering an unknown contact. Calm, thorough, and arriving at a conclusion within 3 seconds. Whatever the conclusion was, it was not threat, because the dog's posture remained at ease. Marcus looked at the girl. She had seen him stop and was watching him with the careful, evaluating attention of a child who has been standing on a cold sidewalk for long enough to have developed a specific read on the people who stop versus the people who almost stop and then look away and keep walking. He crouched down to her level, not because he had decided to, because it was the correct thing to do, and his body knew it. "How old is Shadow?" he asked. The girl blinked. It was apparently not the first question she had been expecting. 7, she said. He will be 8 in April. What kind of work does he do? He does tracking and apprehension, and he can find drugs and also explosives. but mostly he does tracking." She said it with the specific, detailed fluency of a child who has heard this information many times and absorbed it completely. "He has citations. I have them at home." Marcus looked at the dog. 7 years old, police-trained, cited, and being sold on a street corner for $5 by a child who looked like she had been standing in the cold for at least an hour. "Who does Shadow belong to?" he asked. "My dad," the girl said. "Sergeant Ryan Bennett. He works at Millbrook PD." She paused. "He used to work at Millbrook PD." "Used to?" She gripped the lead a little tighter. "He got sick. He had to stop working." She looked at the sign. "Shadow costs a lot to feed, and his vet bills are expensive, and my dad said we might have to give him back to the department. But the department said they don't take back retired dogs, so now we have to find someone who can take care of him." She looked back at Marcus with those careful eyes. $5 is okay. I just want him to go somewhere good." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The cold was significant, and she had no gloves, and the dog was leaning very slightly against her left leg, the small, instinctive press of an animal, providing warmth to the person beside it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophie." "How long have you been out here, Sophie?" She considered the question with the honesty of a child who has not yet learned to manage information strategically. "Since 7:30. My dad thinks I'm at Emma's house." Marcus processed that. 8 years old, alone on a street corner since 7:30 in the morning, selling her father's dog without her father's knowledge. He felt something move through him that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow, but was in the direction of both, and had underneath it the particular quality of a person encountering a situation they recognize as wrong in a way that exceeds any single specific injustice. "Does your dad know you're doing this?" he asked. Sophie looked at the ground. "No." "Why not?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because he would stop me," she said. "And if he stops me, then we can't pay for his medicine. And if we can't pay for his medicine, then—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together, the way children do when they are managing something adult-sized with child-sized emotional resources. "He needs his medicine." Marcus sat with that for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which every calculation available to him ran simultaneously and arrived at the same result. He stood up. "How far is your house?" Sophie looked up at him. "Why?" "Because I want to meet your father." Her eyes went uncertain in a way that was more complicated than simple suspicion. "He doesn't like it when people know we need help. He gets upset." "I know," Marcus said. "I've met people like that before." He had been people like that before. He understood the specific, immovable pride of a man who has spent his life being the person others leaned on and cannot locate the emotional architecture for reversing the direction. "I'm not going there to tell him you need help. I'm going there to meet the man who trained that dog." Sophie looked at Shadow. Shadow looked at Marcus. The dog's tail moved once, a small, deliberate acknowledgement that Marcus filed as operationally significant without being able to fully explain why. "He lives 4 blocks, Sophie said. "Lead the way," Marcus said. She looked at him for one more moment, the full, unguarded assessment of a child deciding whether to trust an adult who has given her no specific reason not to. Then she turned and started walking with Shadow at her left side, in the precise heel position of a dog that has been walking this route for years and knows exactly where it leads. Marcus fell into step on her right. "You are in the military," Sophie said. It was not a question. 6 years, Marcus said. "Navy." "My dad says you can always tell," she said. "He says it's the way you stand." "Your dad is right," Marcus said. They walked in silence for half a block. Shadow's nails clicked on the pavement in the steady rhythm of a working dog, covering ground with purpose. Around them, Millbrook moved through its Tuesday morning, with the particular indifference of a city that has too much of its own business to pay attention to a discharged Navy SEAL and an 8-year-old girl walking a police dog 4 blocks to a conversation that neither of them had fully prepared for. "He's not going to want to talk to you," Sophie said at the second block. "He doesn't talk to people much anymore." "That's okay," Marcus said. "I'm not much of a talker either." "Then why are you coming?" Marcus thought about the honest answer. "Because you were standing on a street corner in February, trying to sell your father's dog for $5 to pay for his medicine. And you told me he doesn't know you're doing it, because he would stop you." He kept his voice level and direct, the voice of a person being accurate rather than gentle. "That is not a problem that $5 solves. That is not a problem that going home and not saying anything solves." He looked at her. "It's a problem that needs someone willing to walk 4 blocks on a Tuesday morning and knock on a door." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "He might not open it." "He might not," Marcus agreed, "but I have nowhere to be until 900. She looked up at him. "What's 900? 9 o'clock, Marcus said. "Military time." "Oh," she considered this. "What happens at 0900? "Nothing," Marcus said. "That's the problem." Sophie looked forward again. They were at the 3rd block. Shadow's pace had not changed. His ears were forward and his dark eyes were scanning, and he was, Marcus observed, orienting very slightly toward the left, in the direction they were walking. The particular body language of an animal approaching familiar terrain and recognizing it. "He knows we're going home," Sophie said. "Yes," Marcus said. "He does." "He always knows." She paused. "He slept on my dad's bed after Dad got sick. Every night. Dad says he's too big to be on the bed, but he stopped arguing about it." She gripped the lead. "I don't want to sell him. I really don't." "I know," Marcus said, "but I don't know what else to do." Marcus looked at her. 8 years old, no gloves, an hour in the cold, carrying a problem that had no business being hers to carry, and carrying it anyway, because it belonged to someone she loved, and love does not negotiate with the size of the weight it is willing to pick up. "You don't have to know what else to do," he said. "That is what the next 20 minutes are for." They stopped in front of a house on Clement Street's 4th block. Shadow sat automatically at Sophie's left side and looked at the front door, with his ears up and his tail producing one slow, deliberate movement that was the specific body language of a dog that has come home and is informing everyone present of that fact. Sophie looked at the door. She looked at Marcus. "He's going to be angry," she said. "Probably," Marcus said. "You're still going to knock?" Marcus looked at the door. On the other side of it was a man he had never met, who was sick and proud and being quietly destroyed by both simultaneously, while his 8-year-old daughter stood on street corners in the cold, trying to carry the weight of it for him. Marcus had spent 6 years in the Navy, learning to walk through doors that nobody wanted opened. This was not the hardest door he had ever knocked on. He knocked. The door opened on the second knock. Ryan Bennett was 41 years old and looked 60. Not in the way of a man who had aged poorly, but in the way of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had stopped being able to conceal the weight of it. He was tall, still, and the frame of him communicated what he had been before the illness, the way a structural wall communicates what a building was designed to hold, even after the load has been removed. His eyes were sharp and dark and moved from Marcus to Sophie to Shadow and back to Marcus in the rapid, threat-assessing sequence of a law enforcement officer whose instincts had not been touched by whatever the illness had taken from the rest of him. He looked at Sophie. "I thought you were at Emma's." Sophie said nothing. Ryan looked at the cardboard sign Sophie was still holding. He looked at it for 3 full seconds, and something moved through his face that was not anger, not yet, but was the specific predecessor to anger that a person produces when they encounter evidence of something they knew was happening, but had been allowing themselves not to fully know. He looked at Marcus. "Who are you?" "Marcus Cole," Marcus said. "I was discharged from the Navy 43 days ago. I was walking on Clement Street this morning, and your daughter was selling your dog for $5. Ryan's jaw tightened. It was the only external movement. Every other part of him stayed controlled with the specific, practiced containment of a man who has been managing his responses under pressure for 20 years of law enforcement and is applying that skill to a situation that is considerably more personal than any call he was ever dispatched to. "Sophie," he said, "go inside." "Dad." "Inside. Please." Sophie looked at Marcus. Marcus gave her a small nod, the nod of a person communicating that the situation is under control, and the next part does not require her to be present for it. She went inside. Shadow went with her, pausing at the threshold to look back at Ryan once with those dark, systematic eyes, before disappearing through the door. Ryan looked at Marcus. "I appreciate you bringing her home." "I didn't bring her home," Marcus said. "I walked with her because I wanted to meet you." "Why?" "Because your 8-year-old daughter has been standing on a street corner in February since 7:30 this morning, trying to solve a problem that is too big for her. And the reason she's doing it alone is because you have too much pride to let anyone help you solve it with her." He kept his voice level and direct and without judgment, the voice of a person stating an observation rather than delivering a verdict. "I know that pride. I have it too. And I know what it costs the people around you when you let it run the situation." Ryan looked at him for a long moment, the sharp, dark eyes doing their assessment and arriving at something more complicated than the dismissal Marcus had half expected. "You should go," Ryan said. His voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man who knows what he is about to say is not what the situation requires, and is saying it anyway, because the alternative requires him to open a door he has not been able to locate the mechanism for. "I don't know you. I don't take help from people I don't know." "You don't take help from people you do know, either," Marcus said. "Or Sophie wouldn't have been on that street corner." Ryan's hand on the doorframe tightened. One small movement, the only concession his body made to the accuracy of what had just been said. "Sergeant Bennett," Marcus said. He used the rank deliberately, the way you use a person's operational identity to remind them of who they are, underneath whatever the current circumstances have made of them. "I spent 6 years serving. I have been discharged for 43 days, and I have nowhere to be and nothing to do. And I walked past your daughter this morning, and she was trying to sell Shadow for $5 to pay for your medicine." He paused. "I am not here to feel good about myself. I am here because that is not a problem that goes away if I keep walking." Ryan looked at him for a long time. Then he stepped back from the door. It was not an invitation exactly. It was the removal of an obstacle, which was the closest Ryan Bennett was capable of getting to an invitation, on the 3rd minute of knowing a person. And Marcus recognized it for what it was, and walked through the door before Ryan could reconsider. The inside of the house communicated the same thing the man did. The structure of a well-maintained life being managed by someone whose capacity for maintenance had been significantly reduced. Sophie's backpack was on the floor by the stairs. Shadow was at the kitchen entrance, watching Ryan with the attentive, patient eyes of a dog that has been monitoring its person's health with the focused consistency of an animal that understands something is wrong and has decided that proximity is its primary available response. Ryan lowered himself into the chair at the kitchen table with the careful, deliberate movement of a man managing pain he has been managing for long enough that the management has become automatic. He did not invite Marcus to sit. Marcus sat anyway, across the table, because standing would have made the conversation feel like an interrogation, and Marcus had not come here to interrogate anyone. "How long?" Marcus asked. Ryan looked at him. "How long what? How long have you been sick?" Ryan's jaw worked. 14 months. "What is it?" "Kidney disease, stage 4. He said it the way you say something you have said enough times that the saying of it has lost most of its weight. "I'm on the transplant list. The dialysis costs $1,100 a month after what insurance covers. I was managing it until 6 months ago, when the overtime dried up and the department put me on medical leave." He paused. "I have a VA application pending. It has been pending for 9 months." Marcus absorbed that. 14 months of illness, 6 months without the overtime that had been bridging the financial gap. 9 months of a VA application moving through a system that was not built for speed. And a daughter who had spent her Tuesday morning on a street corner with a cardboard sign because the adults with the authority to fix the situation had not fixed it. "Shadow," Ryan said. He looked at the dog, who was still at the kitchen entrance, watching him. "He's not department property. He was assigned to me for the duration of my service, and when I retired, he came with me. That's how it works with canines who have served long enough." His voice shifted in the way of someone moving from operational information to something more personal and more difficult. "He costs $200 a month in food and veterinary maintenance. I cannot justify $200 a month right now." "So you were going to give him up?" Marcus said. "I told Sophie we might have to." Ryan looked at the table. "I did not tell her to go sell him on the street." "She wasn't selling him because you told her to," Marcus said. "She was selling him because she couldn't find another way to help you, and she needed to do something." He paused. "She told me you would stop her if you knew. She was right." Ryan pressed his hand flat on the table. "She's 8 years old. She should not be carrying this." "No," Marcus said, "she should not. That is what I am here to help you with." Ryan looked at him directly. "You don't know me." "I know you well enough," Marcus said. "I know what a man looks like when he has been fighting something alone for too long and has gotten so used to fighting it alone that asking for help feels like losing the fight." He held Ryan's gaze. "It is not losing the fight. It is finding a better strategy." Ryan's expression moved through something that was not quite yielding and not quite resisting. The expression of a man who recognizes a truth and is trying to determine whether recognizing it requires him to do anything about it. Shadow walked from the kitchen entrance to Ryan's chair and sat down and pressed his head against Ryan's knee. Ryan's hand went to the dog's head automatically, the gesture of a man who has been making that exact movement for 7 years and whose hand knows the route without being directed. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had taken her coat off and was watching her father and Marcus with the careful, evaluating attention of a child who has learned to read adult conversations from their physical indicators because the words are not always available to her. "Dad," she said, "he stopped. Nobody else stopped." Ryan looked at her. 23 people walked past me," she said. "I counted. He was the only one who stopped." She looked at Marcus and then back at her father. "Don't make him leave." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Shadow's tail moved once against the floor. Ryan looked at his daughter for a long time, with the expression of a man encountering evidence of something he already knew, in a form that makes it impossible to continue managing it at a distance. Sophie had her mother's eyes, dark and direct, and carrying more than they should have to carry for their age. And she was using them on him right now, with the complete, unguarded urgency of a child who has run out of strategies and is left with only the truth. "Sit down, Sophie," he said. She sat. He looked at Marcus. What do you think you can do? It was not agreement. It was not acceptance. It was a question asked by a man who is still holding his position, but has opened a crack in the wall to hear the answer, which was more than Marcus had expected to get in the first 10 minutes, and was enough to work with. I have contacts in 3 veteran support organizations, Marcus said. I have a former team leader who sits on the board of a Veterans Medical Assistance Fund in Richmond, and I have 43 days of nothing to do and a specific skill set that includes navigating bureaucratic systems under pressure. He paused. The VA application. Can I see it? Ryan looked at him. Why? Because 9 months is too long. Applications that stall that long have usually hit a specific administrative bottleneck that nobody has gone back to find and clear. He held Ryan's gaze. I have time. I have the patience for it. And I have nothing else to do with my Tuesday. Ryan reached across to the counter behind him and picked up a manila folder that had the particular soft-edged, frequently handled quality of a document that has been picked up and put down many times by a person trying to determine whether today is the day they do something about it. He set it on the table between them. 14 months of documentation, he said. Service record, medical evaluations, financial disclosure, everything they asked for. Marcus opened the folder. He went through the first 3 pages with the systematic, page-by-page attention of someone conducting reconnaissance on terrain they were about to move through. And on the 3rd page, he found what he had been looking for. A secondary verification request from 9 months ago, buried in the middle of a form that had been completed around it rather than addressed. The specific administrative oversight of a man managing an overwhelming paperwork burden while managing dialysis and a daughter and the slow erosion of a life he had built over 20 years. This, Marcus said. He turned the page so Ryan could see it. Secondary employment verification for the 6 months prior to your medical leave. It was requested 9 months ago. It was never submitted. Ryan stared at the page. His jaw tightened. I submitted everything they asked for. You submitted everything in the initial packet, Marcus said. This request came in as a follow-up 6 weeks after you filed. It was sent to the address on your original application. He looked at Ryan. Did you move in the past year? Ryan was very still. 8 months ago. We moved to this address 8 months ago. Marcus looked at him steadily. The request went to your old address. It was never returned undeliverable. It just sat. He closed the folder. That is why your application has been pending for 9 months. It has been waiting for a document that you never knew was requested. The kitchen was completely silent. Sophie looked at her father. Ryan looked at the folder. Shadow looked at Ryan with the focused, patient attention of a dog that has been monitoring something for a long time and is watching its person arrive at an understanding. 9 months. Ryan said quietly. 9 months, and it was a forwarding issue. A forwarding issue and 1 secondary verification document, Marcus said. I can have that document submitted by tomorrow morning and a priority review request filed within 48 hours. Ryan looked at him. The sharp, dark eyes had changed in a way that was subtle and significant. The specific change of a man who has been fighting something alone for so long that the arrival of a specific, actionable solution produces something closer to disorientation than relief. Because relief requires a moment of believing the fight might actually end, and he had stopped permitting himself that moment a long time ago. Why are you doing this? Ryan asked. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Marcus thought about the honest answer. He thought about 43 days of walking without direction and a coffee maker he had not learned to use, and an apartment with nothing in it that required his attention or his skill or the specific operational competence that 6 years of Navy service had built in him and that had been running at 0 load since the discharge. He thought about an 8-year-old girl standing on a street corner in February with no gloves and a cardboard sign and a German shepherd that was too good to be sold for $5. Trying to solve a problem that was too large for her with the only resource available to her, which was the willingness to try. She was standing out there alone, Marcus said, and she didn't stop until someone stopped with her. He held Ryan's gaze. I stopped. Marcus submitted the secondary verification document at 7:14 the following morning. He had spent the previous afternoon at Ryan's kitchen table, working through the entire 14-month application file with the systematic, methodical attention of a man who had spent 6 years in the Navy, learning that the difference between a mission succeeding and failing was almost always in the details that nobody had checked twice. He had found 3 additional documentation gaps alongside the forwarding issue, each one small enough to be overlooked by a sick man managing dialysis, and a daughter and the grinding daily logistics of an illness that had no consideration for paperwork deadlines. He filed the priority review request at 7:31. He called his former team leader, Chief Petty Officer David Reyes, now on the board of the Virginia Veterans Medical Assistance Fund, at 8 o'clock exactly. Reyes picked up on the second ring. You're calling before 9. Something happened. I need a bridge grant, Marcus said. Veteran, law enforcement, 14 months of kidney disease, stage 4, transplant list, $1,100 a month in dialysis costs after insurance. VA application stalled, 9 months on an administrative error. I filed the correction this morning. He paused. His daughter was selling his canine on a street corner yesterday for $5. There was a silence on Reyes's end that lasted 4 seconds. How old is the daughter? 8. Another silence. Send me the file. Marcus sent it before he hung up. He was back at Ryan's door at 9:15 with coffee from the place 2 blocks over, because Ryan's kitchen had a coffee maker that was older than Sophie and produced something that Marcus had politely described as ambitious. Ryan opened the door without surprise, which meant he had been expecting Marcus to come back, which meant something had shifted in the wall he had been holding in place since the door opened the previous morning. Reyes reviewed the file last night, Marcus said, stepping inside. The fund meets Thursday. He is putting Ryan Bennett on the agenda as a priority case. Ryan was at the kitchen table. He had the folder open in front of him again. The folder that had been sitting on his counter for 9 months, waiting for a day that felt like the right day to do something about it. He looked up at Marcus. The meeting is Thursday. Thursday, Marcus confirmed. Today is Tuesday. Yes. Ryan looked at the folder. Something moved through his face that was not quite hope, and not quite the resistance to hope that had been running the show for 9 months. Something between the two that was fragile and specific and had the quality of a thing that could go either direction, depending on what happened next. What does a priority case mean in terms of timeline? Reyes said emergency bridge grants can be dispersed within 10 business days of approval, Marcus said. If the fund approves Thursday, you could have a payment toward your dialysis balance within 2 weeks. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. 2 weeks, he said. He said it the way you say something you would stop letting yourself calculate, with the careful, tentative quality of a person doing arithmetic they had trained themselves not to do because the numbers never worked out. 2 weeks, Marcus said. Not permanent. A bridge to cover the gap until the VA application processes. Reyes thinks the corrected filing will move within 60 days, now that the bottleneck is cleared. Ryan closed the folder. His hand stayed on it, flat, the same way it had been the previous day. The gesture of a man maintaining contact with something he cannot yet bring himself to fully engage with, but cannot put down either. Why is he doing this? Reyes doesn't know me. He knows me, Marcus said. And I told him about Sophie. Ryan's jaw tightened. That is not a criticism, Marcus said immediately. It is a fact. A child standing on a street corner for 2 hours in February trying to take care of her father is a fact that moves people who still have the capacity to be moved. Reyes has that capacity. I told him the truth, and the truth did what it does. Ryan looked at him. The sharp, dark eyes were doing the assessment again. The same assessment he had run on Marcus every time Marcus said something that landed in the vicinity of a truth Ryan had been managing at a distance. You have been here for less than 24 hours, Ryan said. You walked through my door as a stranger. You found the thing in the VA file that 9 months of my trying didn't find. You called someone on a board I didn't know existed and got my name on a Thursday agenda. He paused. Who does that for someone they don't know? Someone with nowhere to be and a specific skill set, Marcus said. That is not an answer. Marcus looked at him directly. I was walking on Clement Street at 8:12 yesterday morning, and I had been walking every morning for 43 days. Because walking is the only way I have found to make the days feel like they have a direction. I have a discharge check and an empty apartment and a coffee maker I can't use, and 6 years of training that has been running at 0 since I got out. He held Ryan's gaze. Sophie stopped me on that street corner. Not because she said the right thing or did the right thing. Because she was out there alone, doing a hard thing, and nobody was stopping. That stopped me. He paused. I don't need a better reason than that. Ryan looked at his hands on the folder. Shadow, at his right side, pressed his head against Ryan's knee in the gesture that Marcus had now seen the dog produce a dozen times. The automatic, consistent response of an animal that has appointed itself a monitoring function and is executing it with the steadiness of a dog that does not require acknowledgement to continue. Sophie came in from the hallway and stopped when she saw Marcus. Her expression shifted from the careful, evaluating look she had been wearing since yesterday morning into something more open. The expression of a child who was allowing themselves to believe something is actually happening because an adult has now shown up twice, and that is one more time than most adults have shown up. Did you fix it? She asked Marcus. I started fixing it, Marcus said. The rest takes a few days. But it's fixable? Yes. She looked at her father. Ryan looked back at her with an expression that Marcus would not be able to describe adequately later when he tried to explain it to Reyes, except to say that it was the expression of a man seeing his daughter clearly for the first time in a long time, and finding that what he saw was someone who had been carrying significantly more than she should have been carrying, and who had been doing it without complaint and without credit for a period of time that had no business belonging to an 8-year-old. Sophie, Ryan said. His voice was rough, in the way of someone speaking through something they had not fully processed. I need you to tell me exactly how long you've been trying to solve this. Sophie looked at the table. Since November. Ryan was very still. November was 3 months ago. I know. What did you try before the sign? She was quiet for a moment. I wrote a letter to the VA, she said. I looked up the address online, and I wrote a letter explaining about your medicine and Shadow's food, and I sent it with the $3 I had saved. She looked up at him. I don't know if they got it. Ryan's jaw worked. He pressed his lips together once, and nodded once, and looked at the table with a specific, controlled expression of a man who is managing something that has arrived with considerably more force than he had braced for. You wrote a letter to the VA, he said. I told them you were a good police officer, and Shadow was a good dog, and you both served for a long time, and you needed help, and I thought they should know. She paused. I signed it, Sophie Bennett, age 8, Millbrook, Virginia. Marcus looked at the table. because looking at Ryan in that moment felt like an intrusion. Shadow's tail moved slowly against the floor. "Baby," Ryan said. His voice had lost the controlled quality entirely. What remained was something much simpler and much harder. "You should have told me." "You would have said not to," Sophie said. "You always say not to." "I know I do," Ryan said. "I know." He looked at his hands. "I have been saying not to for a year, and you have been finding other ways for a year, because I kept saying not to." He paused. "That's on me, not you." Sophie crossed the kitchen and sat in the chair beside her father, and leaned against his arm, the way children lean against parents when they have been managing adult weight for too long, and need to remember that the weight is supposed to go the other direction. Ryan put his arm around her without hesitation, the automatic, complete gesture of a parent whose body has never stopped knowing how to do that part, regardless of what the illness had taken from everything else. Marcus stood up. "I'm going to make some calls from the other room. Give you both a few minutes." Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. He had been in the living room for 6 minutes when his phone rang. It was not Reyes. It was a number he did not recognize with a Virginia area code. And when he answered it, the voice on the other end was female and clipped, and carried the specific controlled tone of someone who is prepared what they are about to say and is delivering it as written. "Is this Marcus Cole?" "Yes." "My name is Patricia Walsh. I'm a caseworker with Millbrook Family Services. I'm calling regarding a welfare check request filed this morning concerning the Bennett household." A pause. "We received a report that a minor child was observed unaccompanied on Clement Street in below-freezing temperatures for an extended period. Our office is required to conduct a follow-up visit." Marcus was very still. "Who filed the report?" "I'm not able to disclose that information." "When is the visit?" "This afternoon, between 2 and 4. Another pause. "Are you a family member?" "No," Marcus said. "Are you a legal guardian?" "No." "Then I'd ask that you ensure Sergeant Bennett is aware of the visit and is available to receive our caseworker." The voice had the professional neutrality of someone who has delivered this kind of call many times and has learned not to allow tone to signal outcome. "We're not here to cause problems for the family. We're here to ensure Sophie's well-being." Marcus kept his voice level. "Understood. He'll be available." He hung up and stood in the living room for 30 seconds with the specific, focused attention of a man processing a new operational variable that has just entered a situation he thought he had mapped. Someone had seen Sophie on that street corner and had not stopped to help her. They had made a phone call instead, and that phone call had activated a process that had nothing to do with helping Ryan pay for his dialysis, and everything to do with the question of whether Sophie was safe in her father's care, a question that a sick man with a stalled VA application and an $1,100 monthly dialysis bill, and a daughter who had been writing letters to federal agencies at age 8, was not going to answer well in a 2-hour window between 2 and 4 on a Tuesday afternoon. He went back to the kitchen. Ryan looked at him the moment he appeared in the doorway and read his face with the trained precision of a law enforcement officer who has spent 20 years learning to extract information from the body language of people who are trying to manage what their face is doing. "What happened?" Ryan said. "Family Services is coming at 2, Marcus said. He said it directly, because Ryan was not a man who needed information managed, and because they had less than 5 hours, and 5 hours was enough time if they used it correctly. "Welfare check. Someone reported Sophie on the street corner." Ryan's face went very still. The stillness of a man who has just seen a threat materialize from a direction he was not watching. "They're going to look at the house," Ryan said. "They're going to look at everything." "Yes," Marcus said. And they're going to see a sick man who can't work and can't pay his bills, and whose daughter was selling his dog on the street to cover his medical costs. Ryan's voice was flat and controlled, and underneath the flat control was something that Marcus recognized as the specific fear that does not announce itself as fear because it is too specific and too real for that. The fear of losing the one thing you have that is worth more than everything else combined. He looked at Sophie. She was watching her father with those dark eyes that missed nothing. "Sophie," Marcus said, "I need you to trust me for the next 5 hours." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. Just like that, without qualification, without conditions. The complete, uncomplicated trust of a child who has decided that a person is trustworthy and is acting on that decision with the full commitment of someone who does not do things halfway. Ryan looked at Marcus. "What do we do?" It was the first time he had asked that question without resistance in it. The first time the asking had been clean and direct and open. The question of a man who has put down something he has been carrying alone for a long time and is looking at the person standing across from him and deciding, for the first time, that putting it down is not the same as losing. Marcus looked at Ryan. He looked at Sophie. He looked at Shadow, who was sitting at Ryan's heel watching Marcus with those dark, operational eyes, calm and ready, and completely present. "We start with the house," Marcus said, "and then we make some calls. And when the caseworker arrives at 2, everything they see is going to tell the truth about who you are." He paused. "Not who this year made you look like, who you actually are." Shadow's tail moved once against the floor. Ryan stood up. They had 4 hours and 41 minutes. Marcus had run tighter timelines than that in conditions considerably less forgiving than a house on Clement Street with a sick man and an 8-year-old girl and a German shepherd who tracked every movement in the room with the attentive, systematic patience of a dog that had been assigned a protective function and intended to execute it regardless of whether anyone had officially issued the order. He started with the calls, not because the house needed to wait, but because the calls had longer lead times, and every minute of delay on the calls was a minute they could not recover. He stepped into the living room with his phone and worked through his contact list with the focused efficiency of a man who has spent 6 years learning that the difference between a successful outcome and a failed one is almost always in the preparation window and what you do with it. Reyes first. "I need you to send the fund's preliminary support letter to my email in the next 2 hours. Not the approval, just confirmation that Ryan Bennett is on Thursday's agenda as a priority case. Something on official letterhead that a caseworker can read and understand." Reyes said, "You have a caseworker situation?" "I have a caseworker situation." 2 hours, Reyes said. "Done." He called the Millbrook Veterans of Foreign Wars post next. He did not know anyone there. He looked up the post commander's number on his phone and called it directly. And when a man named Gerald Hutchins answered, he said, "My name is Marcus Cole. I served 6 years Navy. I'm sitting in the kitchen of a 20-year Millbrook PD veteran named Ryan Bennett, who was on a transplant list with a stalled VA application and a family services visit at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And I need to know if your post has a veteran family support program and whether someone can be at this address before 2. There was a silence. "What's the address?" He gave it. "I'll be there by noon," Hutchins said. "I'll bring Deanna. She's our family liaison. She's better at this than I am." "Thank you," Marcus said. He went back to the kitchen. Ryan was at the sink, washing dishes that did not need washing. The automatic, purposeful movement of a man who needs to be doing something with his hands, while his mind is somewhere else entirely. Sophie was at the table with Shadow beside her, her hand in the dog's fur, watching her father with the careful, assessing attention she deployed whenever the adults around her were managing something she could not fully see. Hutchins from the VFW is coming at noon, Marcus said. He's bringing someone named Deanna. She handles family support cases. Ryan turned from the sink. You called the VFW? Yes. I have been a member of that post for 11 years, Ryan said. His voice had a quality in it that was not quite anger and not quite something else. I have never called Gerald Hutchins. I know, Marcus said. That's why I called him. Ryan looked at him, the sharp, dark eyes doing the assessment and arriving again at the complicated place they always arrived at when Marcus did something that cut past the wall Ryan had been building and maintaining for 14 months. You called a man you've never met at a post you've never been to.
I called a veteran about another veteran, Marcus said. That's a different kind of call. Ryan dried his hands on the dish towel and set it down, and looked at the table and sat down across from Sophie. He looked at his daughter for a long moment with the expression of a man who is doing an accounting of things and finding that the balance is more complicated than the ledger he has been keeping. Sophie, he said, tell me about the letter you sent the VA. Sophie looked up. I told you about it. Tell me again. All of it. Everything you wrote. She took a breath. I told them your name and your badge number and how many years you worked and that you got sick and that Shadow helped you on lots of cases. And one time he found a little boy who had been missing for 2 days, and the boy's family sent us a card at Christmas. She paused. I told them that Shadow costs $200 a month and your dialysis costs $1,100, and that I was trying to help, but I didn't have enough money. And I thought they should know, because you served for a long time, and I didn't think that was supposed to mean that everything fell apart when you got sick. Ryan was very still. You told them about the little boy. Marcus Webb, Sophie said. He was 4. He's 6 now. His mom sends us a card every Christmas still. Ryan looked at the table. His jaw worked once. You remembered his name. You talked about him a lot, Sophie said. After. You said Shadow found him by smell alone in 4 hours, when the search teams had been out for 2 days. You said it was the best day of your career. She looked at Shadow. I thought they should know that. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Shadow pressed his chin on Sophie's knee. She put her hand on his head without looking down, the automatic, natural gesture of a child who has been doing that exact movement for years. Ryan looked at Marcus. My daughter wrote a better case for my VA application than the 14 months of forms I filed. Yes, Marcus said, she did. We should include the letter in the IG review request. I already noted it in the priority filing this morning, Marcus said, if she kept a copy. They both looked at Sophie. She reached into the back pocket of her jeans and produced a folded piece of paper that had the soft, handled quality of something carried for a long time. She set it on the table. I kept a copy, she said, in case they lost it. Marcus looked at the letter. Ryan looked at the letter. Shadow looked at Ryan. In case they lost it, Ryan said quietly, to nobody in particular. Marcus unfolded it carefully. Sophie's handwriting was the handwriting of a child who had worked very hard at making it legible. The specific, deliberate clarity of someone who understood that the person reading it needed to be able to read it easily and had taken that responsibility seriously. It was 3 paragraphs long, and it was the most direct, clear, and human document Marcus had read in 43 days of discharge paperwork and transitional bureaucracy. He looked up at Ryan. I'm going to scan this and add it to the priority filing, with your permission. Ryan looked at his daughter. Yes, he said. You have my permission. Gerald Hutchins arrived at 11:52 with a woman named Deanna Marsh, who was 58 years old and had the specific, warm, no-nonsense energy of someone who has spent a long time doing difficult things in difficult circumstances and has found a way to do them without losing the human quality that made them worth doing. She took one look at the kitchen, one look at Ryan, one look at Sophie, and one look at Shadow and said, "Okay, tell me everything. We have 90 minutes before the caseworker arrives, and I want to use every minute of it." Ryan started talking. It took 40 minutes, not because he was slow, but because Deanna asked the specific questions that opened the specific doors that Ryan had been keeping closed for 14 months. And once the doors were open, the information behind them had been waiting long enough that it came out with the accumulated pressure of everything that had been held back. Deanna took notes. Hutchins sat across from Ryan and said nothing, and nodded at intervals in the way of a man who understands that some conversations require witness rather than participation, and is providing the witness without requiring acknowledgement. At minute 41, Deanna put her pen down. "Okay," she said. "Here is what Family Services is going to look for when they come at 2. They are going to look at Sophie's physical well-being, her environment, her relationship with you, and your capacity to provide consistent care." She looked at Ryan directly. Your capacity to provide consistent care is the question. Because a man who is on dialysis 3 times a week and cannot work, and has a child who is selling his dog on a street corner for medical money, is a man whose capacity is going to be in question. "I know," Ryan said. "So we answer the question before they ask it," Deanna said. "Not defensively, proactively. We show them the VA priority filing and the fund application and the VFW support engagement, and we show them a father who has been fighting for his family for 14 months and who has a support network actively engaged as of this morning." She looked at Marcus. "You being here helps. A veteran actively involved in support engagement is different from a sick man, alone, with a child and a dog." "I'll be here," Marcus said. "Good," she looked at Sophie. "And you. When the caseworker talks to you, which they will, I need you to tell them exactly what you told me. Not what you think they want to hear. Not what you think will help your dad. The truth, exactly as it is." Sophie looked at her. "What if the truth makes him think he can't take care of me?" Deanna met her eyes steadily. "The truth is a father who loves you so much that you have been trying to protect him for 3 months without telling him. The truth is a man who raised a child who writes letters to federal agencies at age 8 to advocate for him. That is not the truth of a man who cannot take care of his daughter." She paused. "That is the truth of a man who raised a remarkable child. Let them see that." Sophie pressed her lips together once and nodded. Patricia Walsh from Family Services arrived at 2:07. She was professional and careful, and had the specific, measured quality of someone who has learned to withhold judgment until they have complete information, and applies that skill consistently, regardless of what the initial read of a situation suggests. She shook Ryan's hand and Marcus's hand, and crouched down to Sophie's level and said, "Hi. I heard you have a very impressive dog." Sophie looked at Shadow. "He found a missing boy once, in 4 hours, when the search teams have been looking for 2 days. Walsh looked at Shadow. "What's his name?" "Shadow. He's a police dog. He retired with my dad." Walsh straightened and looked at Ryan. "Can we sit down?" They sat at the kitchen table, all of them, and Walsh asked her questions with the professional care of someone executing a process she respects, and Deanna provided the documentation as the questions required it. And Marcus sat at the end of the table and said nothing, because nothing was the correct contribution for this specific portion of the operation. And he had learned a long time ago that knowing when to be silent was as operationally significant as knowing when to act. At 3:15, Walsh asked Sophie if she could speak with her alone for a few minutes. Ryan looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at Marcus. Marcus gave her the same small nod he had given her on the doorstep the previous morning. She stood up and followed Walsh into the living room, with Shadow at her heel, because Shadow had not left her side since Walsh arrived,
and Walsh had made no move to prevent it, which Marcus noted as a specific kind of professional intelligence on Walsh's part. The kitchen was quiet. Hutchins looked at his hands. Deanna looked at the documentation spread across the table. Ryan looked at the living room door. "She's going to be honest," Ryan said. Not a question. "Yes," Marcus said. "She's always honest. She was honest yesterday when she told me she had been trying since November." He paused. "I did not know my 8-year-old daughter had been carrying this for 3 months. I was in the same house, and I did not know." "You were sick," Marcus said. "I was sick, and I was proud," Ryan said, "in that order. The sick part I could not control. The proud part I could have." He looked at his hands. She was writing letters to the VA. She was counting people on street corners. She was doing all of it, and coming home every day and being normal, and I did not see it, because I was too focused on managing what I would not let anyone help me manage. Deanna put her pen down. "Ryan, what you're describing is what a lot of veterans in your situation do. The isolation is not weakness. It's a trained response to a system that has historically not delivered when veterans asked for help. You stopped asking because asking had stopped producing results." She paused. "But Sophie didn't stop asking. And that is because she did not go through the same system you went through. She just went straight to the people and said this is true and it needs to be fixed." She looked at him steadily. "That is something you taught her. Not by telling her. By showing her that the truth matters enough to say out loud, regardless of whether anyone is listening." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Shadow appeared in the kitchen doorway, which meant the conversation with Walsh was over. And a moment later, Sophie came in with the expression of a child who has done something hard and found that they were capable of it. She sat back down beside her father and leaned against his arm. Walsh appeared in the doorway. She looked at the table and at the documentation, and at Ryan, and at Sophie, and at Marcus, and at Deanna, and at Hutchins, and at Shadow. And her expression had the quality of a person who entered a situation with an open question and has arrived at an answer. "Sergeant Bennett," she said, "I'm going to file my report this afternoon. I want to be transparent with you about what it will say." She paused. "Sophie is clearly loved, clearly engaged, clearly in a home where someone is fighting for her every single day. The circumstances are difficult. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But difficulty is not the same as danger." She looked at Sophie. "Your daughter told me that a stranger stopped on Clement Street yesterday morning, when 23 other people didn't. She told me that in the last 24 hours, that stranger fixed a VA application that has been stalled for 9 months and got her father's name on a medical fund agenda for Thursday." She looked at Marcus. "She told me that what changed was one person stopping." Marcus said nothing. Walsh nodded once, the nod of a person who has completed their assessment and is at peace with where it landed. "I'll be in touch through standard channels. What I saw today is a family being supported. That is what my report will reflect." She let herself out. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment after the door closed. Then Hutchins said, "Well," in the tone of a man who has been holding his breath for an hour and has just been given permission to exhale. Sophie looked at her father. "Are we okay?" Ryan put his arm around her. "We're okay," he said. The rough quality was back in his voice. He did not try to manage it away. "We're better than okay." Shadow's tail swept the floor once, twice. The full, unhurried movement of a dog that has been doing its monitoring function all afternoon and has determined that the current status of its household is the best status it has recorded in a very long time. Marcus looked at his phone. Reyes's email had come in at 1:47. The official letterhead document confirming Ryan Bennett as a priority case for Thursday's fund meeting. 2 pages, precise and professional, and carrying the full institutional weight of an organization that had been built specifically to catch people in exactly the gap Ryan Bennett had been falling through for 14 months. He set the phone on the table and slid it toward Ryan. Ryan looked at the email. He read it twice. He set the phone down and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at them and said nothing for 30 seconds. "Thursday," he said finally. "Thursday," Marcus confirmed. Ryan looked up. His eyes were full, but his jaw was set, and the combination of those two things, in that specific face, was the most honest expression Marcus had seen in 43 days of an honest situation. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Marcus said. "Thursday, you walk into that fund meeting and you tell them exactly what you told Deanna today. All of it. 14 months of it." He held Ryan's gaze. "And you let them help you." Ryan looked at him for a long moment. The sharp, dark eyes, clearer now than they had been when the door opened the previous morning, doing the final assessment and arriving at the place they had been moving toward since the moment Ryan had stepped back from the door and let Marcus through it. "Okay," Ryan said. It was the simplest word, and it carried everything that had shifted in the past 24 hours inside it. The 14 months of not okay, and the specific, deliberate choice to let something different begin. Shadow put his head on Ryan's knee. Ryan's hand went to the dog's head. The automatic, complete gesture of a man whose relationship with that animal had been the one constant through everything the illness and the pride and the 14 months had taken from the rest of his life. Marcus looked at them. Father, daughter, dog. The 3 of them at a kitchen table in Millbrook, Virginia on a Tuesday afternoon, with a Thursday meeting on the calendar, and a VA application moving for the first time in 9 months, and a caseworker's report that would say the word supported rather than the word at risk. He thought about Clement Street at 0812. He thought about a cardboard sign and a $5 price and 23 people who had kept walking. He was glad he had stopped. The Thursday meeting lasted 2 hours and 11 minutes. Marcus drove Ryan there because Ryan's license had been restricted 4 months ago, when his neurologist determined that the dialysis fatigue made solo driving a liability, and because Sophie had school and someone needed to be in the waiting room in case Ryan came out needing a person rather than a parking lot. He sat on the hard plastic chair outside the fund's conference room in a building on Richmond's west side and drank bad coffee from a machine in the hallway and waited with the particular practiced patience of a man who has spent 6 years learning that some operations require you to hold your position and trust the person inside the room to do their part. At minute 94, he heard Ryan's voice through the conference room door. Not the words, the quality of it. The direct, unmanaged, fully present quality of a man who has stopped performing composure and is simply telling the truth to people who are listening to it. At minute 131, the door opened. Ryan came out with his jaw set and his eyes full, and Deanna Marsh right behind him, because Deanna had come as the VFW liaison, and because she had been in that room before and understood that the moment after a veteran asks for help for the first time in 14 months is a moment that requires a specific kind of company. Ryan looked at Marcus. He said nothing for 3 seconds. Then he said, "They approved it." Marcus stood up. "Full amount?" "Full bridge grant. 3 months of dialysis coverage while the VA application processes. Starting next week." He stopped. His voice had the controlled quality of a man managing the specific, disorienting weight of a problem that has been pressing on him for so long that its removal produces something closer to vertigo than relief. They said Sophie's letter was the deciding factor, not the medical documentation, not the service record. The letter an 8-year-old wrote to the VA about a missing boy named Marcus Webb.
Marcus looked at the floor for a moment.
She told you that. Deanna got the full account from the committee chair afterward. Ryan paused. One of the board members has a granddaughter Sophie's age. He read the letter out loud to the room before the vote. He stopped again. He apparently had some difficulty finishing it. Deanna, standing behind Ryan, pressed her lips together once, in the way of a person who was in that room and is not going to describe it further because some things do not benefit from elaboration. Marcus looked at Ryan. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," Ryan said. He extended his hand. Marcus took it. Ryan gripped it with a specific, complete grip of a man communicating something for which he does not have adequate words and is using his hand to say it instead. They drove back to Millbrook and picked Sophie up from school at 3:15. She was at the curb with her backpack and her careful, evaluating expression, and she looked at her father's face through the windshield before Marcus had fully stopped the car. And whatever she read there produced a change in her face that was immediate and total, and had the quality of a child allowing themselves to believe something they had been holding in suspension for a very long time. Ryan got out of the car. Sophie ran to him. He caught her with both arms and held her with the full, unconditional completeness of a man who has been fighting to remain present for exactly this for 14 months. And has just been given a reason to believe the fight is going to produce more of these moments, rather than fewer. Marcus stayed in the car and looked at the steering wheel, and gave them the moment. Sophie's voice, muffled against Ryan's coat. "Did they say yes?" Ryan's voice. "They said yes." A sound from Sophie that was not a word, but that carried everything the words would have said. Marcus looked up after a moment. Shadow was visible through the front window of the house across the street, where Hutchins's wife had been staying with him during the meeting. His tan and gold face at the glass, ears up, watching the reunion in the middle of the street with the focused, patient attention of a dog that has been monitoring this household for 7 years and has just recorded its best status update in 14 months. He was going to be fine. They all were. That was day 4. On day 9, the VA priority filing received its first response in the form of a caseworker assignment and a 45-day processing commitment, which was not the end of the bureaucratic road, but was the first marker on it that had appeared in 9 months, and that Ryan looked at on his phone at the kitchen table, with the expression of a man who has been walking through a dark space and has just identified a light source at a distance that is real, rather than imagined. On day 11, Marcus's phone rang at 7 in the morning with a number he did not recognize. "Marcus Cole?" Male voice, older, careful. "Yes. My name is Thomas Webb. You don't know me. My son is Marcus Webb. He's 6 years old. He was found in the Ridgeline Woods 2 years ago by a German shepherd named Shadow and a police officer named Ryan Bennett." A pause. "I got your number from Gerald Hutchins at the VFW post. He told me what's been happening with Ryan." Marcus was very still. "Yes, I want to help," Webb said. "I don't have a lot. I work construction. But I have been wanting to do something for that man since the day his dog brought my boy out of those woods, and I never found the right way to do it." Another pause. Hutchins said now might be the right time. Marcus pressed the phone against his ear and looked at the ceiling of his apartment. "Mr. Webb, do you know anyone else who has been looking for a way to say thank you to Ryan Bennett?" A pause. Yeah, I think I do." "Call them," Marcus said, "and then call me back." Webb called back 2 hours later with 7 names, 7 families in the Millbrook area who had been on the receiving end of something Ryan Bennett and Shadow had done in 20 years of law enforcement, and who had been carrying a gratitude they had not found a way to deliver. Missing persons found. Evidence located. A child recovered from an abduction attempt. A building cleared after a bomb threat. The specific, irreplaceable work of a man and a dog who had spent 20 years doing the thing that needed doing without requiring an audience. Marcus called Hutchins. "I need the VFW hall for a Saturday." Hutchins said, "Which Saturday?" "Whichever one you can get me." "Next Saturday," Hutchins said. "It's already booked for a bingo night, but I'll move it." Marcus looked at his phone after he hung up. He had been discharged for 53 days. He had a Saturday on the calendar, and 7 families, and a VFW hall, and a man on a transplant list who had not asked for any of it, and was going to receive all of it anyway, because the alternative was letting 20 years of service go unacknowledged by the community it had protected, and Marcus Cole had established as a personal operational principle that the alternative was not acceptable. He went to tell Ryan. Ryan heard the full account, sitting at the kitchen table, with his hands flat on the surface, and the expression moving through his face in the specific sequence of a person receiving information that is too large to process in real time, and is doing the best approximation of processing that the moment allows. When Marcus finished, Ryan was quiet for 40 seconds. 7 families, Ryan said. 7 that Webb knows of. There may be more. You are organizing an event. Hutchins is organizing an event. I am supplying the reason for it. Ryan looked at him. Marcus. Yes? I spent 14 months not telling anyone what was happening, because I was afraid of what it would look like if people knew. His voice was rough. I was afraid it would look like I couldn't handle it, like 20 years of service didn't count for anything, because one disease was taking me apart. He stopped. And in the last 11 days, you have made 11 phone calls to people I have never met, and every single one of them said yes immediately. Yes, Marcus said. Why? Because 20 years of service counts for everything, Marcus said. Not in theory, specifically. To specific people whose specific lives are different because of what you and Shadow did. He held Ryan's gaze. The only person in this situation who was keeping a ledger that said you were alone in this was you. Ryan looked at Shadow. The dog was at his heel with his chin on Ryan's knee, and his amber eyes at rest in the settled, complete ease of an animal that has been running its monitoring function for a very long time, and has determined that the current status of its person is the best it has been in 14 months, and is permitting itself to rest in that determination. Okay, Ryan said. The same word he had said 11 days ago at the kitchen table, when Marcus had first asked what they should do. The word that had been getting cleaner and more open every time Ryan said it. The word of a man learning a new and better version of what it meant to accept something from people who were offering it freely. Saturday arrived with 31 people in the VFW hall. Not the 7 Marcus had planned for. Webb had called 7 people, and 7 had become 15, and 15 had become 22, and Hutchins had quietly added 9 more from the Post's own membership who had specific Ryan Bennett stories they had been carrying, and had needed a room and a Saturday to put them down in. Ryan walked in with Sophie and Marcus and Shadow, and stopped just inside the door, and looked at 31 people who stood up when he came in. Not because anyone had organized it, but because it was the natural, uncoordinated response of a room full of people who had been waiting for the right moment to stand up for this specific person. Sophie looked at her father. Ryan looked at the room. Shadow looked at everyone with his systematic operational scan, and arrived at a conclusion within 3 seconds that was not threat, was nothing close to threat, was the warmest and most complete read of an environment that dog had produced in 14 months. And his tail began to move with the slow, profound, full-body movement of an animal that has assessed its situation and found it to be exactly right. Thomas Webb spoke first. He was a compact man in a flannel shirt who held his hat in both hands, the way men hold things when they are managing more than they want to show. And he said, "My boy is 6 years old, and he sleeps through the night because of you and that dog. I have been wanting to say that to your face for 2 years, and I am saying it now." He stopped. "Thank you, Sergeant Bennett. From me and from Marcus and from his mother. Thank you." Ryan's jaw was set. His eyes were full. He did not try to manage either of those things. He stood in the VFW hall for an hour and 40 minutes and listened to 31 people tell him specific, irreplaceable, true things about what his 20 years had meant to them. And he received every one of those things, without deflecting, and without minimizing, and without the 14-month armor of pride that had been protecting him from exactly this. Because he had learned in the past 11 days that the armor was not protecting him from the difficulty of being seen. It was protecting him from the relief of it. And the relief, it turned out, was the thing he had needed most, and had been the last thing he had allowed himself to reach for. Sophie sat beside him the entire time, with Shadow at her feet and her hand in the dog's fur, and the expression of a child who has watched something happen that she had been trying to make happen for 3 months with a cardboard sign and $5 and a letter to a federal agency, and has discovered that what made it happen was not the sign, or the $5, or the letter, but the morning a stranger stopped on Clement Street when 23 other people did not. The VA final approval came 6 weeks later. Full service-connected disability determination. Retroactive coverage. Transplant list priority status updated. Marcus was in his apartment when Ryan called. It was 9:17 in the morning. He had learned to use the coffee maker. "It came through," Ryan said. "All of it?" "All of it." A pause. "Marcus, all of it." Marcus looked at his coffee. "Good," he said. The word was not adequate to the thing it was responding to. It was the only word he had, and it was the right one anyway. "Sophie wants to know if you're coming for dinner," Ryan said. "What time?" 6. She's making pasta. She watched a video and she says she knows how." "She watched a video and she says she knows how," Marcus repeated. "She is 8, Ryan said. "She is extremely confident." Marcus looked at his apartment. The duffel bag was fully unpacked. The kitchen contained more than protein bars. He had been to the VFW hall 4 times since Saturday and knew 7 people by name, and had been asked by Hutchins to help coordinate the post's veteran outreach program, a role that had no title and no pay, and was the first thing in 53 days of discharge that had felt like it was built at exactly his dimensions. He had nowhere to be until 6. "I'll be there," he said. He hung up and looked out the window at Clement Street 2 blocks over, and thought about 0812 on a Tuesday morning in February, and a little girl in a winter coat and a cardboard sign, and a German shepherd with dark, systematic eyes, who had been sitting in the cold with her, because that was what he did. Because she was his person, and his person needed him there. And 7 years of training, and 3 combat tours, and a state citation for finding a missing 4-year-old boy in 4 hours had produced in him the complete, unwavering certainty that where she went, he went, and where she stood, he stood. Marcus Cole had walked out of the Navy 43 days into nothing, and had walked down Clement Street at 0812 looking for a direction, and had found a little girl selling the police dog for $5. And had stopped because stopping was the correct thing, and his body had known it before his mind had finished the calculation. He had not gone back to walking aimlessly after that. He had not needed to. The direction had been there the whole time. He just had to stop to find it. A child stood on a street corner alone and did not give up and did not go home and did not stop asking until one person stopped with her. And that one person stopping changed everything. For Ryan, for Sophie, for Shadow, and for a discharged Navy SEAL who had spent 43 days looking for a reason to be exactly where he was needed. Some things cannot be found by looking for them. They can only be found by stopping when everything in you says keep walking, and choosing, for no reason except that it is the right thing, to stay. Marcus Cole stopped. He stayed, and nothing about any of them was the same again.